this was a dope conversation right here. As at this show, these two guys had a sit down. It's called Money for Nothing, and they were actually talking about how with Spotify adjusting their new payment system, that this is actually an adjustment by the record labels for making sure that they have huge market share of Spotify. So they want most of the overall Spotify audience to be listening to music from their labels. But the more filler of people coming in from DistroKid or other kind of services where these artists are independent, it brings down their market share. So they can go from having about, I don't know, 95% of listenership that's listening to their music, but the more independent artists that come in with only a few hundred streams, their percentages get lower and lower. So they believe that the record labels may have forced Spotify to adjust how they pay out for smaller artists. That way they can maintain their market share, especially going into negotiations with Spotify, as they've been trying to pivot around to getting to podcasts, audiobooks, and other audio forms. They're trying to really pivot away from the record label. So it's like a battle within a battle. But these two had a nice sit down. You guys check it out, and every once in a while, I'm gonna definitely check in.
Important changes. I think this set of changes is really, really important because of what it tells us about the relationship between Spotify and the music industry, what it tells us about how people are positioning for kind of this what's coming next in the music industry. And what you were saying before is that this is this like the first real move in kind of a soft around the edges beginning, a reconstruction of like the fundamental mechanics of the streaming industry as we've known them for the past decade. And so yeah, so for one, I think that this like under 1,000 demonetization thing, which I do not believe actually hits songwriters. So the publishing rights still get paid out, but it's the master rights. The loser here, right, actually, in terms of who maybe makes money, is not songwriters, because like I think it's like ideologically, yes, everyone who should get paid, and like fundamentally, it's totally messed up that like you can like platform, like you can network effect like terms of service tyranny, if that makes any sense. Like if you want your stuff to be, if you want to be a real musician and widely accessible except in a handful of like genres or scenes, like you need to be on Spotify, and therefore Spotify can say anything it wants in its terms of service, and you sort of have to do it, because they can just say like, well, if you don't want to do that, you don't have to be on Spotify. And you're like, well, you do need to be on Spotify. It's like has an element of the public square. It just happens to be a mall, which is a privately owned public square.
It happened to be a mall where people have to sell their music, but at the same time, that mall is being approached by the mafia every once in a while and is getting extorted, aka that's the record labels.
So they like it is a big deal ideologically speaking. But I think that in terms of industry mechanics, this is like a tactical strike on the distributors. And on the indie distributors in particular, like DistroKid, CD Baby, TuneCore, etc. And we've talked in previous episodes about Spotify, kind of about the declining percentage of major label music on the streaming service, and the way that might be shifting the kinds of negotiated leverage between the majors and the DSPs, digital service providers like Spotify. And right, so like the basic thing is, as you were saying, Saxon, like they have the Spotify kind of has to do what the majors want, because in order to be a functional streaming service, you need the IP that only they can provide. But there's some wiggle room where if it's 95% major labels, Strong's being streamed, like, yeah, you have to do what they say. But if it's 80%, maybe not as much. And if it's, this is Majors plus Merlin, which is the big, we did an episode about this, is the big kind of indie clearinghouse, if you will. Like, if it's 70, if it's 60, at a certain point, you get more leverage, because you're like, guys, you're just not as much of our business as you used to be.
And I believe that's eventually gonna happen to the labels because the more and more years go by, all those classic songs that they have, that generation is not really going to Spotify to hear those songs. They most likely have the albums already or the vinyls. And the younger generation coming in, they're just not gonna go to Spotify to listen to a classic Beatles fucking track. Come on, let's keep it a buck here. And with the overall narrative every single year is that, hey, don't sign a record deal, they're gonna screw you. The labels, in a way, they can't let that noise get too loud because it's gonna discourage a lot of people from signing up when they realize they have to already bring in their fan base, produce the music themselves, and basically the money the labels loan you is for you to actually provide them with at least 8 to 10 albums.
Maybe we can like renegotiate some of those rates. Maybe we can finally have like a functional business.
Well, so this is it. This is interesting, and maybe you can like kind of break this down for me because actually I did read about this as well, and like we haven't discussed it before the show, and I think it'd be beneficial to the listeners actually if we kind of explain this because I agree that it does align with also like what Lucian Grange and like the big labels like want. In fact, there's actually even a quote on I guess like some investors call or something. Grange was quoted as saying that those groups that have expressed a concern about a quote unquote artist-centric streaming royalty model, which is the basically what Grange supports, are unsurprisingly those whose business model is based on being merchants of garbage. Sorry, I really can't think of another word for the content that no one actually wants to listen to. And then later said, if you're committing fraud to flooding the platforms with content that have absolutely no engagement with fans, that doesn't help churn, that doesn't merchandise great music and professional artists, then I suppose you're not going to be in favor of an artist-centric model.
So who the hell is signing professional artists? That same label record exec, the label that he's on, they don't sign professional artists. They just sign people that went viral. So him trying to act like a journalist, you know how the journalist goes, oh, there's no ethics in journalism anymore. But it's like half your industry is in entertainment. The same way the music business now is it's really, I don't want to say it's a clown show or the artists are gestures, but they're really signing people that kind of are known for things outside of the music. But to act like you have some integrity, oh, it's about the art, don't flood the market with these bullshit artists. It's like, in a way, your artist is bullshit, except you have them plugged in to your playlist on the platform.
Music Business Worldwide said that Grange was primarily directing his ire over companies who flood platforms with content, such as you mentioned, DistroKid, CD Baby, and TuneCore. And so my understanding is that that's because those DIY quote-unquote distribution services are like have an open door policy, like they're not discerning about like who they like are distributing.
Yeah,
but that just so it is interesting.
And the labels don't like that. The labels don't like that, and it seems like with these rules, Spotify, well, they're forcing Spotify to tighten up on that. And at the same time, we got to be careful the way they're labeling everything nowadays as content. That is that's a kind of a corporate ploy in a way to kind of downgrade everything, because you could make a blockbuster film in Hollywood that has like a $500 million budget, and then versus someone that just made a TikTok video and they label it the same thing, content. That is one of the greatest finesses of all time, to just label everything the same thing, content. But meanwhile, someone just paid a ton of money to produce an album with instrumentation, and you're just labeling it content. The same way someone just lift up their phone and film themselves. It's not the same thing.
So that's the reason why he's like, why this is kind of like shots fired at these sort of like quote unquote DIY distribution services.
And to be very clear, when Lucian Grange says artist centered, he does not mean like on behalf of musicians. He means like a vision where certain musicians are certain music is like artistically viable, and it has a certain set of payout structures associated with it, and other sounds are sounds, and like they're not considered music, and they don't have the same kind of IP or payout structure. So in some way he's trying to like you could say like there's a tension between like a YouTube world and a record store. A record store, everything's produced by a label of some kind, and it's all music. YouTube world, music is just more content, and it doesn't actually matter whether or not, like, it's a song or sounds, like, or a deep, I sometimes work with, like, a deep pink noise hum YouTube video, and they get...
In a way, if you think about it, that can actually destroy the record labels. That can actually destroy the record labels. I mean, out of all the money they spent being plugged into the platform, all the playlists, just everyone kind of uploading, I would say democratized platforms like YouTube pretty much destroy their whole business model, because the music industry as a whole, it operates like the mafia. They control everything from the arenas you get to perform at, the promoters, the clothes you sell, the CD stores, the storage, everything. They've 360 the whole game. And I believe a lot of independent artists that get popular on their own, and they're figuring out, hey, all these venues have promoters that kind of work under maybe the UMG umbrella. I mean, once again, democratized platforms like YouTube, it kind of destroys the record label's ability to 360 the whole game. And at the same time, Spotify on the other end is coming in and is like, hey, all this extra content that's being flooded into the platforms is actually killing your market share. Even though you own Drake, Madonna, Prince, Elvis, Michael Jackson, but those artists combined is not gonna hold you enough market share to avoid the flood of millions and millions of people just hitting the upload button and coming into the platform. So we're trying to pay you less every year. The record label sense it, and Spotify at the same time, they're trying to get out of that. Like I said, that relationship between Spotify and just even Apple Music, just all these streaming platforms and the record labels is almost as if the streaming platforms have a storefront and they're getting extorted by the mob. But except the mob doesn't realize that, hey, this is the 21st century. You can't just extort Starbucks. That's like walking into Starbucks, like, hey, I'm gonna extort you guys. Give me the cash, or give me 10% of your sales. It's like, nah, the manager gotta respond to corporate. You can't just take 10% of the sale.
They get payouts for that, right? It's
Right.
ad supported, and it's ad supported. I think in most of these channels function the same way. I mean, some of them have specific relationships with YouTube, but that's a different story. And so he's kind of saying by artist-centric streaming or artist-centric model, he's talking about like artists as defined by the music industry, which is like a record industry. And yeah, so I think that is exactly right. When these companies are flooding the market with garbage, they let anyone throw stuff in, and some of that is like a million cat sounds or whatever, and some of that is a million like 13-year-old SoundCloud rappers who want their stuff on Spotify or whatever. But I think what you see there is, and there had been, right, a very clear downward trend on the market share within platforms like Spotify of the majors, as no, most of these get 500 plays, let's say. I mean, they don't even, but let's say, you could have a huge, but there is this long tail where all of a sudden, if you have enough tracks that have 500 plays, especially if they're kind of being fed in an increasingly algorithmically structured listening environment, so there is an ability to have discovery across the bounds of notoriety, maybe like you could be in nowhere, but like if you just fit right with an algorithm, you could start getting a little bit of traction. All of a sudden that long tail could start to create real leverage and a kind of
as we're seeing in the numbers,
as we were seeing in the numbers. So for me, this is shocking, honestly, because my read on the situation had been, surely Spotify is pro distribution services because this, like, they need to have more leverage against the majors. And this very much felt to me like Lucian Grange said jump and Spotify said how high, sir.
Yeah, I mean, completely, for sure.
Completely.
And it's Spotify's fault that they're in this position, because when they initially started their platform, they could have did what SoundCloud did. Had they just started out like with that and just leave the music industry out of it, all the old records that were record label controlled, leave it to them to sell it. If they just started off fresh and trusted the new generation would come in with music being valuable, then their platform will be basically YouTube right now, except for music. But instead, they went to bed with the record labels where 77% of their profit goes to the labels. I don't even know how the hell they're running their business right now. We see them with making major cuts every quarter. Money isn't cheap anymore with these interest rates. Shit is being shaken up at Spotify, and they're trying to pivot bad. The podcast shit didn't really work out for them, and they're trying to pivot. They're going into audio books. God damn, this smoothie is good. Got a little shit on my throat, but yeah, but they try to pivot and go into audiobooks, and it didn't really work out for them. So they're trying to find any way to leverage of not giving the record labels the money that they want. And the record labels, how they really operate is off of market share. They'll go like, yo, we have Drake, Madonna, Rihanna, UMG. We're under this one umbrella. We have at least 60% of the music that's most valuable in the marketplace. They're just in an acquisition phase. The same way Spotify in a way does acquisition for audiences. They may sign Joe Rogan, but they're really inquiring about his audience. That's what that 200 million is for. So it's a different game that these entities are playing. Different game, and they all sort of operate like McDonald's. You think McDonald's sells burgers or that's primarily their business, when they're really just franchising and they just own a bunch of real estate.
Way that I think is fascinating, because what it suggests is that really this company, which has not been having a great year, which had its pivot to podcasts, which didn't end up, for a variety of reasons, didn't end up paying out the way it did, though I still think made sense as a strategy. Like, it seems to me that you need to get leverage against these companies that are willing to just have total power over you. But this seems like they just totally capitulated in a way that's gonna, can't imagine it doesn't cut off a lot of that long tail growth.
And I think that probably, I mean, maybe this is something we can kind of talk about a little bit, is that it's doing that because, as we've seen over the years, basically Spotify has been trying to Spotify's been trying to squirm its way out from underneath the pressure of the major labels. Like, we're going into audiobooks, we're going into podcasting, all this. None of it's fucking worked. It is the defining source of listening to music in at least the Western world right now. And obviously we don't need, this is obvious, but obviously, streaming music makes up 84% of all, streaming music makes up 84% of how we consume our music now, or some, opposed to physical sales or downloading MP3s. Yo, real heads out there downloading MP3s, shout out to you. So obviously it realizes it's the dominant.
At some point, when Spotify and all the other streaming services start raising the price and you find yourself spending $20 a month for music you barely listen to, yeah, I guess those MP3 heads might come out on top, or just people who purchased the raw album or maybe the vinyl. But at some point, the streaming service is gonna have you almost buying 2 albums a month. It's gonna be $20 plus.
It's a dominating platform for streaming music, and it wants to maintain its longevity. I don't know, maybe someday fucking earn a fucking profit. Anyways, but I think it's basically at this point where it's okay, we just need to play the game they want us to play.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, it's
maybe
that's
I don't know. Maybe
fascinating, right? Because it does seem like after a couple years in which the only way I think to read the podcasting push in Spotify was as a way to, we're not a music company, they said, we're an audio company, right? So there was a real, not just a little bit, a real push to get out of the major label thumbs. And this just seems like I said, a total capitulation in a fascinating way. And a capitulation also, and this is the question here, is why, right? And there's a couple of reasons. I don't really know, but there's a couple of reasons I can think about, right? Which is, one is what they're doing here is really important. In addition to the inter-industrial story, it's really important, for the reason that you said before, which is that we're starting to see just a little bit around the edges a restructuring of the basic rules of streaming. We've seen a couple of companies adopt different models. We're now seeing this, right? And it's kind of like baby steps, because I think, right, there's a lot ideologically invested among listeners, among the press, among the broader public in like how these systems function. And I think that people don't want to assume that they're just sort of like a random, and not just don't want to assume, like earlier systems were structured by governmental intervention in ways that like created at least a seemingly stable marketplace. Like how much songwriters get paid is determined by a copyright rates board. ASCAP and BMI, the performing rights organizations, are like semi-governmental in as much as their activities are defined by consent decrees. Like there's a sense that like it shouldn't just Hollywood and is structured by these massive labor organizations, which again, it's not like anyone can just do whatever they want in terms of the payouts around these major artistic forms. And so I think that there's a lot of interest in like, there needs to be something feeling like it's vaguely fair, because for the industry, it's very important that it feels vaguely fair, because while musicians don't have a lot of power, they do have a lot of public support. And like Bruce Springsteen can call up a president. Like he just can, right? Bruce Springsteen can get the president on the phone. And like maybe he can't make a change, but there's a lot, like they've got a lot of cultural power. And if I think that, so it's very important for the record industry to like maintain at least a plausible sense that like this is a system with legitimacy. This is a system that's institutionalized. This is a system that's that major artists support, and that like isn't, that like has real heft, and there's a reason it exists. This is a system that exists, and it's like a system that's like not like, this is just something that we came up with randomly when we were like absolutely panicked in 2007 and we thought the sky was falling.
But them making it look like everything's all fair and game, the music industry was never born that way. It's been rigged since the jump. They're coming out with a bunch of albums after they die that sounds computer generated. At the end of the day, this industry was never to be made fair in the first place. But artists do have a lot of cachet with their fans. But I'm telling you, man, the record labels, they're gonna find any way to get an edge over the artist. I don't want to say the audience. It's mainly over the artist. They don't want guys going independent and then actually being successful and having other artists just upload their shit to DistroKid, go on tour, and make their own money, and all the labels are cut out. Once again, they basically 360 the game.
So it does seem that they're starting to remake this system, and they're doing it really carefully. And they're doing it with this artist first ideology that like I have a lot of distrust in, but like is being couched in specific terms. It's saying it's against garbage. It's right in all these ways where they're trying to remake streaming. And the question is what they're trying to remake it for. For someone like Lucian Grange, it's clearly so that
Lucian Grange, for all you don't know, he's basically almost the biggest head in music. That is the biggest head in the music industry. He's basically the I would say the alpha lion of the whole industry. Whatever he wants, he gets.
blue chip artists make money from streaming because from an industry perspective, you could think about it that like streaming, you could argue that streaming and where the industry makes its money like have gotten maybe not a little out of sync, but have a potential for getting out of sync, right? Like you want streaming to support artists who then can go on tour forever and make money for decades, because that's like actually what the industry wants. And so
just going back to what you said earlier about like how like the stat we dropped even earlier this year, and what you said earlier about like how like these DIY distributors are starting to take like a larger cut of the streaming.
well, yeah, and that too, they don't want that to happen, obviously, and they want to keep having their power over Spotify, and I think that they like want.
That's crazy. They're taking a large cut of the streaming that's like half a penny, a quarter of a penny. Jesus, this whole shit sounds like a mess. I knew it was a mess when Spotify had first started, and they equated 1,000 streams for an album being sold in the stores. When most artists today, we already know, they don't even have any idea of how it was to buy a CD from a store. There's guys right now that are 18, 20, that never ever at any point in their lives waited in line to walk to a store to buy a fucking CD. So why the hell they're going into a system that's equating their streams based off of that? That shows you right there that the whole shit from the beginning is based off of fraud.
So this is gonna end up in a world where blue chip artists get paid out better, and like a select set of blue chip artists are able to like cut through the digital noise. Partially, I mean, and this is where I think it gets really interesting, because I don't think the music industry is fundamentally thinking about Spotify here or about streaming. I think they are getting ready for a number of
The same way they didn't think about YouTube. The same way they didn't think about YouTube. They could have had their own platform, but now they have to upload their shit to YouTube. The industry has always been late.
new conditions that are starting to emerge. And I think TikTok is one example of this kind of space. Like, it's important for the record industry to figure out a way that it can like create artists on TikTok, artists who have careers that look like musicians, that
Instead of personality. You know what? TikTok basically took the Instagram famous rapper or just star and 10x'd it. Basically, you already know, like off rip through TikTok, this is not even music driven. This is almost 90% personality driven. You can see Cor Lorray. She's like one of the prime examples of that. Nothing has to do with the music. I mean, these guys are literally at music awards for what? You make like songs that are 1 minute and 50 seconds. This shit is oh man. Yo, to see how this is gonna play out, especially with TikTok, I'm telling you, TikTok threw the monkey wrench at the music industry, because now it's like people had a feeling that this was a gimmick when Instagram came about, and you saw all these little artists that everyone knew couldn't rap or sing get famous. But now TikTok just it really put things into the forefront. People know, oh, you're just a TikTok artist. You're not really an artist.
like the kinds of trajectories of careers that the record label is really good at organizing, and not that it looks like Reddit. You know what I mean? Where it's just like a whole bunch of like semi-anonymous user-generated activity. And
Yeah, they're trying to, I think, like they're trying to like basically have more of a hand in curating like what the next big artist is, instead of having to sort of pay attention to what's happening on like an app that you know, another app that they don't really have any kind of control over, which, I mean, as we said, they do have a little bit of control over TikTok, but there is a certain level of like randomness now about like what is the next big artist, who pops up, you know, what becomes like popular. And I think they just want to have like more of a hand in that, more of a control over that. And like,
Yeah, and at the same time, TikTok being a Chinese company, that may make things even more complicated. 'Cause I'm pretty sure behind the scenes with that, inside the inner workings, there's a lot bigger things at play than just a bunch of songs and just a bunch of dances. There's a lot of data being collected, and who knows who the fuck is even looking at that shit, analyzing to do what with it. So there's a lot of international, I would say, I don't want to say espionage, but politics into play with that. But the labels, at the end of the day, TikTok, man, it really threw the monkey wrench in their whole business model of rolling out an artist. It just made their whole business and product look so gimmicky.